Hello, everyone. This is Venerable Tekwang Tree from Dharma Tree, and this is my first episode on Dharma on Demand. So, for this grand first episode, I thought I would start from the basics and basically answer the question, what is Buddhism? Well, as simple as that question may sound, it's actually a pretty loaded question because we will almost always get a different answer depending on who we ask. So, as simple as this question may sound, it can have very simplified or very complex answers depending again on who we ask and where the information is coming from. But generally speaking, and coming from me as a monk, so I have to kind of go into something that's a little bit more oversimplified or maybe under complex. But the point is to what Buddhism is, and from my own experience, my own understanding, and how I view Buddhism not just as the religion that I'm in, but also as the practice that we utilize, that we study and use in our everyday life to help us become better people, to help us become better knowers of ourselves and of others. So, realistically, we can look at Buddhism as a religion, as a philosophy, a psychology, or just a way of life. But the main practice of Buddhism is dependent around loving kindness and loving compassion. So the practice is to attain this life that is peaceful and blissful and free of worry and anxiety. So, as much as that sounds like, oh wow, this is like the perfect thing, it's also unfortunately not a pill that we can just take and have all of our anxieties and struggles and sufferings just magically disappear. So I always joke around and say that, as much as people want to come into Buddhism and learn it or practice it and have this magnificent, perfect life, it unfortunately isn't always that easy because, unlike some of the other major world religions, where our faith and our practice is in someone else's hands, and Buddhism, on the other hand, our own faith, our own practice is in our own hand. So our own suffering, our own happiness is dependent on ourselves and not on some external circumstances or entities or whomever it may be. But a fundamental aspect of Buddhism that it is a mind-centered religion that is aimed at eradicating the three poisons. And the three poisons in Buddhism is ignorance, greed, and anger. And these are what causes us to suffer and live in this cycle of constant birth and death that we call samsara. So the Buddha taught us that the main factor of contributing to our suffering is desire. And this is desire that causes us to want things that we can't obtain and to want the things that we do have to want more of. And we want more of what we already have. We want the biggest, the latest, the newest, the shiniest things, right? And so these desires turn into greed. And when our greed isn't satisfied, we become angry. Then our anger causes us to be ignorant toward the true nature of reality. So Buddhism is the practice of spiritual development that leads to the insight into the true reality or true nature of reality. So the practice is here to teach us how to escape suffering, to eradicate those three poisons of ignorance, greed, and anger, and ultimately become enlightened. So in Buddhist practice, I always emphasize that as grand as Buddhism is, right? Because it is truly a complex system of teachings and practices. But if we were to narrow it down to a few specific practices, we would be able to conclude that the Four Noble Truths, the Eightfold Path, and the 12 Links of Dependent Origination are pretty much the Bible of Buddhism, or at least that's what I would call it. Because really, ultimately, all other practices, all other teachings of Buddhism stems from the Four Noble Truths. Because from the Four Noble Truths, you get the fourth truth, which is the Eightfold Path. And from within the Eightfold Path, we really have to have an understanding and a familiarity with the 12 links of origination, because the 12 links is essentially what causes life to exist. So when people ask, what is Buddhism? I always have to sit and really contemplate for like a whole minute, because it's a very difficult question to answer, because there's no really one right way to explain Buddhism, because there's different teachings, there's different practices, there's the different traditions of Buddhism, the different ways to practice, the different interpretations. And so because Buddhism is so complex, I always find that's one of the most difficult questions to answer is, what is Buddhism? Because we can literally throw every single book of Buddhist practice and teachings and say, this is Buddhism. But if we do that, then we will often scare people off, right? People become discouraged because now they're like, holy crap, this is a lot of information. This is a lot of teachings, this is a lot of practices. And it's true. But one of the reasons why there are so many practices and teachings is because the Buddha was a very good teacher. He did something that almost no other major religion or religious or spiritual figure has done, which is being aware of the audience that he's teaching to. And that was one of the beautiful things that I discovered when I first started to learn Buddhism or practice and study Buddhism, is that there are a, a plethora of different ways that the Buddha taught one topic, right? Because the Four Noble Truths isn't a one fits all. The Eightfold Path isn't a one fits all. Knowing how to meditate is not a one fits all. There are dozens of different explanations and ways that the Buddha taught these topics and subjects depending on who he was teaching them to. And because of that, that is why we have so many different ways and interpretations of the teachings. And so when the Buddha gave a teaching at a palace, right, to the kings and to the ministers and these high ranking officials, he concluded that because of his surrounding, because of where he is and who he's teaching, he knew that these people were at least somewhat educated, if not highly educated, right? And because of that, he taught in a way that educated people would understand. He used terminology and words that they would understand, and it would be easier for them to comprehend those teachings. And he did the same thing when he taught people of lower class or working class or people who had zero education. He taught them in a way that they would understand the teaching. He taught them in a way that they would be able to comprehend the Four Noble Truths, comprehend what it means to live a righteous, virtuous life, and to be able to penetrate the true meaning of the teachings, and so that they can attain enlightenment. And many people did, because of the way he taught, because of the direction he took his teachings according to who he taught them to. So when people ask, especially when new people come to the temple and they're just like, I really don't know what Buddhism is. I'm new to it. I'm curious about it. For me, that's actually one of the most difficult questions to answer. If someone were to come to me and say, hey, Master Quantry, can you explain, the the laws of cause and effect, or karma, or teach me meditation, or what is emptiness, or what are the, you know, the facets and aspects of consciousness. All these crazy questions I can probably answer for you pretty quickly because they're very specific, right? Versus what is Buddhism? Such a broad question that, I don't know, it could just be me, right? It could just be me not knowing the best way to answer the question, but I always try to explain it in simple terms. Buddhism is what you would like it to be for you, because you don't have to be Buddhism. You don't have to be Buddhism. You don't have to be Buddhist to practice Buddhism, right? You can be Catholic, Christian, Muslim, Hindu, whatever you want to be. Practicing Buddhism doesn't mean that you're converting to Buddhism. Doesn't mean that now you're becoming Buddhist. Practicing Buddhism with your own religion just makes you a better practitioner of your own religion, because it's a complementary practice. It's a complementary teaching on top of what you already want to know and practice in your own religion. Because if we truly penetrate the teachings of Buddhism, if we take out the words Buddhism and Buddha or anything else that's Buddhist specific or related, the teachings are still accurate. The teachings are still true. The teachings, regardless of what terminology you use to describe them, the ultimate goal of Buddhism is to help us see the true nature of reality, to penetrate the true nature of reality, to be able to escape our suffering, to be able to see through the three poisons, to penetrate them and to eradicate them completely, to be able to see things clearly without any judgment, without any bias, right? And so when we see or when we're able to see the world in that way, without any judgment, without any bias, without any labels and anything else like that, then we're seeing true reality as it is. And that is essentially what Buddhism is trying to teach us, is so that we can escape all the labels, all the judgments and biases and ignorances that we have of the world within ourselves and around us, to see things as they truly are. Then we get to a state of where attaining enlightenment or nirvana is much easier. So that's probably, this whole thing is probably such a weird explanation of what Buddhism is, but I hope I at least have been able to give a somewhat beneficial answer, so that you can continue to read on your own and practice on your own and study on your own, so that the true answer of what Buddhism is will come to you. Because I can give you every single answer, I can give you every single explanation of what Buddhism is and what the practices and what the teachings are, but it may not do anything for you. It may not affect you until you yourself dig deep into it, until you yourself practice and study and truly apply those practices to your life. Then it becomes penetrative. Then it makes sense. Then you will have those aha moments, and those aha moments are the moments of enlightenment. We think that enlightenment is this grand gesture that happens, right? That when enlightenment happens or occurs to someone, that there's this fireworks show, right? That the room around them lights up and there's this crazy transformation. But as much as we wish or hope that that's the case, that's really not. That's not really how enlightenment or nirvana or aha moments work, right? Those imagery may happen in our own mind when it happens, but externally nothing changes. We don't go anywhere, right? Nirvana is not a destination. It's not a finish line. It's not something that we have to look outside for or look out beyond our own world for. It is something that is already within us. It is just clouded in our mind. Nirvana is already here, right? We have this concept in Buddhism called Buddha nature. And Buddha nature is within every single sentient being. So every sentient being has Buddha nature. That means that every sentient being has the capacity, the capability to achieve nirvana, to achieve enlightenment. And because of that, we are able to have or to practice Buddhism so that that aha moment does occur or can occur, right? The process, the path, the journey will absolutely be different for every single person, but the destination, the goal is will always be the same. So we really have to work on cleansing our mind, right? Because our mind, nirvana, enlightenment is in our consciousness, it's in our mind, but our mind is clouded and it's muddied by all the defilements that we have in our mind and our life, right? It's clouded by all the judgments, the ignorances, our anger, our anxieties, our stresses, our judgments, and everything is clouding the light of nirvana to shine through. And so as we practice Buddhism, as we get to know our mind, as we get to know the world around us, and get to know truly how the mind works, how the world works, how the universe works, right? It's all interconnected. And so when we figure out how our own mind works, then we know how the mind of the universe works as well. And as we penetrate that deeply, or more deeply, as we go through that process and go through our journey, we slowly cleanse our mind. We slowly clean off and dust off the dust of our mind. We slowly clean away, all the mud that is defiling our mind. And eventually, we will be able to have that clear mind, that mind of nirvana, that mind of enlightenment. But it takes time and it takes practice and it takes a lot of diligence. And unfortunately, that's also, though, one of the things that tends to discourage people is because Buddhism is such a mind-centered religion, it is a self-help journey, right? I can't give you enlightenment. The Buddha could not give you enlightenment. The Bodhisattvas cannot give you enlightenment. Only you're able to give yourself enlightenment, right? And so there is a path there, a progress report that we have to do ourselves. And sometimes that scares people off because they are like, well, I don't want to do all the work to become enlightened. Well, I'm sorry, but that's kind of how it works. If you want to become a Buddha, you have to put in the work, right? It's the same thing with anything in life. If you want a good job, you have to do well in school. You have to educate yourself on how the world works and how mathematics work, how science works, how economics works. So if you want a good job, you have to put in the work, right? And even then, when you do have a good job, you probably want a better position. You probably want a higher position, higher role. You want to get promoted. And so you have to put in more work in order necessarily an easy path, but it's also not a difficult path. It's just a path where we actually have to put in work. We have to put in the effort, the diligence, the practice in order to achieve what we're trying to achieve. So that's either a very oversimplification explanation of what Buddhism is, or a complex one, or maybe it just doesn't make sense. So whatever you take from this, at least take that Buddhism is a wonderful path. It may not be for everyone, but it will be something that will truly benefit you, because whether you see the changes directly or indirectly, because those changes that happen or occur while we practice or when we practice and study, sometimes they're very subtle. Sometimes we may not see those changes right away in ourselves because of its subtlety, but other people will notice them. Other people will see and notice, oh wow, he's become much more calmer. He's become less reactive to things. Maybe they'll notice that you're nicer or more compassionate, more understanding, more forgiving, whatever it is, right? Some of these changes that will automatically happen naturally on our practice, right? We may not always see those changes right away or see them at all within ourselves, but other people will. And that's honestly one of the best things that we can do, especially when someone else is asking you what Buddhism is or what the practice of Buddhism is like, because words can only do so much for many people, right? It's the actions that make more sense. It's the actions that really are able to penetrate and help people see clearly. So I always say the best way to explain what Buddhism is to show them. And by showing them, we're showing them compassion, we're showing them kindness, we're showing them generosity, we're showing them understanding, we're showing them that we are not reactive to situations with anger or hostility, but we react with understanding and compassion. And I think that's really one of the best ways to explain what Buddhism is, right? Whether it makes sense or not, but actions speak louder than words, right? So I hope that kind of made sense for you. And if it did, then great. If it didn't, then I'm sorry. But take what you will from this explanation and from this podcast. And I hope that you will continue on with me on this lovely journey together to explain and study together Buddhism in all its beauty and all its practices. Thank you for joining me today. Namo Shakyamuni Buddha.